They mocked her voice before even checking her ticket, dismissing every question as if she were merely a burden, slowing down the process, then bluntly told her that people like her didn't belong in first class. Right in the middle of a crowded terminal, under the watchful eyes of countless strangers, they stripped her of her dignity, not with cutting insults, but with mocking smiles, not with shouts, but with a bone-chilling silence. They couldn't have cared less who she was. To them, she was just an older black woman with a calm air and a gentle Southern accent. And that, in their minds, was enough to judge a person's worth. But what they failed to see was the undercurrent they had just awakened. Before that flight touched down, careers would crumble, entire systems would shake, and the price of their prejudice would leave scars on their reputations that time could never erase. This was more than just another tale of injustice. This was a surgical dissection of a reckoning in silence. The dawn mist of New York clung to the cold glass of JFK's terminal, refracting pale rays through the soaring, vaulted ceiling. Inside, the rush of travelers, eager youths, flustered families, hurried business people, was oblivious to the quietly commanding figure of Marjorie Reed. At 57, her sun-kissed brown skin felt more resonant against the tailored navy coat she wore, the cream silk scarf draped lightly at her neck, her expression radiating the poise of someone who'd weathered countless storms. Just last night, she had landed after an 11-hour flight from Sao Paulo, Brazil, an itinerary she'd mastered through nearly 3 decades at the helm of Reed Global Travel, the nearly billion-dollar silent empire few knew was hers. Though age had dimmed the vigor of youth, her meticulous routine had not wavered, confirming itineraries, verifying connection times, ensuring every security protocol. While other passengers grew weary, waiting in long lines, Marjorie quietly cross-checked every detail. Habitual precision for a woman who'd had to be flawless to counter assumptions about her race, gender, or age. Dragging behind her the same worn leather suitcase that had accompanied her since Reed Global was but a small booking office in Atlanta, she moved deliberately through the cavernous hall. Outside, the chill of dawn outlined her silhouette in a silver halo, underscoring a quiet strength rather than fanfare. Her next flight, first class, seat 2A, non-stop to San Francisco, was a hard-earned reward for her thorough preparation. She had triple-checked the boarding pass, at her Sao Paulo hotel, at her JFK connection, and once more before entering the check-in lobby. On the ticket, every detail was crystal clear. Her name, flight number, 2A first class non-stop. Not a single error in sight, perfect like the life she'd been forced to perfect again and again. Marjorie observed the line ahead with the practiced wariness of someone well-traveled. Her unassuming appearance, a simple coat, hair pulled into a tidy gray bun, belied the unmistakable air of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. Beneath that calm exterior lay the spirit of a powerhouse entrepreneur who had learned to wield silence as a shield against judging eyes across airports, conferences, and negotiation tables worldwide. With fewer than 90 minutes until departure, she tightened her grip on the suitcase's handle, feeling the soft leather worn smooth by time, a testament to the many challenges she'd overcome. She lifted her gaze to the flickering departure boards and silently affirmed that she was ready for the day ahead, even if she knew that, for a black woman well past middle age, no journey was ever truly ordinary. What she didn't yet know was that within hours, a single event would upend everything, from her personal honor to the workings of a global airport. And from those poised, measured first steps, Marjorie Reed would craft a lesson in dignity, power, and unbreakable resolve, one more potent than any shout could ever be. Marjorie's footsteps came to a halt in front of the check-in counter, where cold white lights glinted off every passenger's face. The usual sounds filled the air. The boarding announcements over the PA, the steady roll of suitcase wheels on the polished stone floor. A child crying somewhere in the distance. Yet amid that sea of people, only one pair of eyes remained fixed on her, Tanya Bennett's. Tanya, in her early 30s, wore her golden blonde hair in a perfectly neat top knot, an immaculate uniform shirt, and a name tag that shone against her chest. But what made a colder impression than her crisp appearance was the expression beneath her flawless makeup. A cocktail of boredom, arrogance, and a barely contained bitterness. The moment Marjorie set her bag down and softly said, "Hello, I'm here to check in for my connecting flight," Tanya's practiced service smile vanished, replaced by a lopsided smirk that hinted at ridicule. Calmly, Marjorie replied, "I've just arrived from Brazil, first class, seat 2A. Here are my documents." Tanya took her boarding pass and ID, her red polished fingers tapping the keys so hastily it was clear she wasn't really checking the details. What she was really doing was surveying Marjorie, studying every crow's foot at the corners of her eyes, every silver strand in her bun, every gentle inflection of her southern accent. Tilting her head with mock curiosity, Tanya drawled, "You certainly have a distinct accent. Sounds real southern. Georgia? Alabama?" She lingered on the last word just long enough for everyone nearby to catch the implication, an unspoken verdict that Marjorie did not belong. Marjorie said nothing, merely nodding once, her gaze steady and unflinching. She had encountered this kind of prejudice countless times, where a single trait, skin color, age, accent, was all people needed to decide your worth. In a practiced move of the privileged gatekeeper, Tanya swiveled the monitor away from Marjorie, tapped a few more keys, then looked up, her smile now ice cold. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she announced far louder than necessary, "but the system has reassigned you to seat 34C Economy." Her voice carried down the line of waiting passengers. She didn't stop there. In her eyes shone a small, cruel triumph, the satisfaction of wielding her little bit of authority to define someone else's place, especially an older black woman who refused to submit. A few passengers behind nodded or smirked. Others shook their heads in discomfort. Encouraged, Tanya added, "Sometimes the system auto-adjusts if there's a warning flag. Are you sure you booked first class correctly, ma'am?" To most onlookers, it seemed like a simple glitch. But to Marjorie, every polite word and system error was part of a familiar ritual, using courtesy as cover for exclusion, blaming machines for personal bias. For Tanya, this little performance granted the control she lacked beyond the counter. Here, she dictated who was privileged and who was disposable. For a brief moment, the bustling terminal froze around the two women. One, the face of an entrenched, impersonal power structure. The other, the living symbol of resilience and silent dignity. And behind them, no one guessed that this small exchange would trigger a seismic upheaval, a reckoning this once untouchable system would soon pay for dearly. Just as the air at the check-in counter had grown thick with the tension and isolation Marjorie Reed had just endured, an unexpected movement shattered the spell. Dylan Drayton, a casually dressed young white man in khaki shorts, flip-flops, a rumpled t-shirt and a backward baseball cap, clutching a crumpled paper ticket, strode confidently up to the desk. In an instant, Tanya Bennett, the same woman who moments before had been so icy with Marjorie, flipped a switch in her demeanor. Her face lit up in a broad, over-eager smile, her tone chirping nearly to the point of excess. "Oh, welcome, Mr. Drayton. First class this way. Let me get you a fresh boarding pass right now." Tanya didn't bother to glance at the screen, didn't ask for any ID or confirmation. She barely skimmed Dylan's crumpled ticket before whipping the velvet rope aside and motioning him into the priority line. With a half bow and a friendly half smile, she treated him like royalty. No questions, no raised eyebrows about his appearance or accent, no hint of suspicion, despite Dylan giving off zero VIP vibes. Marjorie, standing to the side with the crisp ticket for Seat 2A clutched in her hand, watched the scene unfold. The contrast was painfully clear. Some privileges exist not on paper, but only for those deemed pleasing to the gatekeeper. A shadow of sadness flickered in Marjorie's eyes. Not surprise, but the bitter recognition that nothing had truly changed, no matter how many years passed. Tanya didn't even bother to hide her favoritism, as if she assumed everyone approved of her choice. She shot Marjorie a cold, challenging glance that seemed to say, "This place isn't for you." Dylan, oblivious to Marjorie, was busy scrolling on his phone, chewing gum, and loudly chatting about his upcoming ski trip as he smoothed past into the VIP line. By Tanya's standards, he clearly belonged here. The counter area erupted in murmurs. A few passengers behind Marjorie frowned, impatient at the unexpected delay. "Why's this taking so long? It's just a ticket." Old people always make things complicated. A middle-aged white woman sighed, pulling her son's suitcase away from the counter. A black student at the back of the line gave Marjorie a sympathetic, helpless look, but didn't dare speak up. At the center of it all, Tanya basked in her little power, knowing none of the witnesses would dare intervene. Her bias played out in plain sight, yet the circle of silence around her held firm. For Marjorie, this moment was never just personal. It embodied the system she knew all too well, a world where a single glance or mocking smile is enough to judge you, enough to normalize injustice. She logged every detail: Tanya's smirk as she welcomed Dylan, the indifferent glances of the other staff, the whispered asides branding her "that old lady" in the way, and the willful turning away of those who'd experienced the same, but stayed silent. Outside, the machinery of the airline hummed on correctly. VIPs sailed through, while people like Marjorie were shoved aside, left waiting and judged for not meeting some unspoken standard. Only Marjorie understood in that quiet moment. These tiny indignities were the first gust of wind before the storm of reckoning, an icy breeze of prejudice that would one day bring the whole edifice crashing down. As Tanya finished welcoming Dylan Drayton, Marjorie Reed stood her ground at the check-in counter, as if Tanya's condescending gaze and mocking smile still weighed on her shoulders. Refusing to passively accept this injustice, she spoke softly but firmly. "May I please speak with the manager in charge?" The terminal seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Tanya cast a quick glance toward the office door behind her, then tapped her radio with an exasperated drawl so everyone could hear. "Oh, Grant, there's a customer complaining about a first-class ticket." A few minutes later, Grant Miller appeared. He looked every bit the part of a major airline manager: a perfectly tailored gray suit, a deep blue tie, neatly trimmed brown hair, and a clipboard bristling with shift schedules and customer priority checklists. But the most striking thing about Grant was his cold gray eyes and nearly expressionless face, a professional mask honed through years of service to shield himself from discomfort. Grant faced Marjorie without meeting her gaze, his eyes glued to his computer screen and the paperwork in his hands, as though she were merely an annoyance to be processed. Politely, Marjorie explained, "I booked first class, seat 2A. I have the email confirmation and the paper ticket right here. I'd like to know why the system reassigned me to seat 34C." Grant flipped through his clipboard without a word, eyes scanning the lines of text, then jerked his chin toward the monitor. "The system shows your name on seat 34C in economy. There's no technical error. We can't override it." His tone was flat. No hesitation, no apology, no hint of empathy. Marjorie remained patient. She pulled out her phone and handed the chain of confirmation emails, the booking code, and the QR pass to Grant, everyone clearly stating 2A first class. But he barely glanced at the screen before averting his eyes. "These things happen when the system auto-adjusts for an internal flag," he said. "We followed protocol. Please step aside so we can help the next guest." Behind the veneer of professionalism, Grant's deliberate detachment was unmistakable. Polite enough to avoid being called rude, yet cold enough to dismiss a customer's feelings. He didn't offer a solution or voluntarily recheck the system. Instead, he gently guided Marjorie toward the back of the queue, as if to erase her presence from the busy terminal. Passengers behind her began to murmur, some impatient, others irritated that one old lady was slowing things down. Tanya watched with a triumphant glint in her eye, as though she'd just won an easy game of chess. No staff member stepped forward to help Marjorie or explain further, only programmed silence and icy indifference. Both Grant and Tanya understood perfectly. Their true power lay not in raising their voices, but in wielding the collective quiet, the silence that legitimizes injustice and normalizes exclusion. To Marjorie, each small detail was more than a denial. It was a message. You don't belong here and no one wants you here. With calm resolve, she nodded once, meeting Grant's impassive face with steady eyes, imprinting every line of his unfeeling mask and every barren syllable. It was the look of someone all too familiar with judgment. Yet, this time, her disappointment carried an extraordinary determination. She was preparing a reply that neither Grant nor Tanya nor this entire system could foresee. Marjorie Reed felt the weight of being erased from the flow of travelers on her shoulders as she quietly pulled her suitcase toward the waiting area. Across from the check-in counter, beneath the harsh yellow lights that cast the staff uniforms onto the glass walls, two figures watched the scene unfold with keen interest. Megan Hayes, a young redhead barely in her 20s, and Chuck Evans, a veteran employee with a graying beard and the weathered face of someone who'd seen countless changes but never changed himself. They stood just out of sight behind a row of auxiliary workstations, the spot where staff gathered to swap behind-the-scenes gossip. Politeness toward passengers was all surface here. Real judgments flitted easily across their lips. Megan tapped away on her phone while her eyes followed Marjorie, not with curiosity but with the cold scrutiny of those who believe they have the right to price others' worth. "That's the old lady from earlier, right? Doesn't look VIP by any stretch." Megan's voice was low but carried, a barb aimed at the fragile pride of anyone long dismissed. A flicker of pity crossed her face before twisting into contempt, her smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth, as though witnessing an overfamiliar tragedy she already knew the ending to. Chuck Evans, more seasoned and no longer entertained by youthful jests, still knew when to chime in for effect. Folding his arms, he let loose a rasping chuckle. "Yeah, doesn't scream money. Old folks always think they're important, but really, they're just a hassle for the system." Their laughter wasn't loud, but it left a sour residue that drifted from behind the counter to the row of chairs where Marjorie maintained her composed posture. Their remarks weren't outright insults, but sharper than any shout. They exemplified the silent complicity culture, a world where every employee feels entitled to trample a customer's dignity with zero fear of accountability. Megan snapped a quick photo of Marjorie, deftly shielding the screen as if on duty, but in truth ready to share the image in the staff group chat, where funny customer call-outs were broadcast and applauded like trophies. "Look at her, always demanding special treatment. Bet she's about to make a scene. Megan whispered. Chuck responded with an amused shrug, as if accustomed to problems like this. Who cares, as long as she doesn't bother me? Meanwhile, passing travelers barely noticed, or if they did, they quietly looked away, unwilling to meet Marjorie's gaze. The airport crowd was always too busy, but somehow nobody dared to pause and ask what was really happening. Marjorie's expression didn't change. She gave the handle of her suitcase a firmer grip and looked straight ahead. The whispers behind her no longer surprised her. At her age, she'd grown used to being judged, to the looks that said, "You don't belong." The conspiratorial laughter from behind, and the way every effort to prove her worth was drowned out by prejudice and apathy. But unlike most in her position, Marjorie didn't respond with anger or rash defiance. Instead, she remembered. Every look, every word, every fleeting smile. All of it was being stored away, piece by piece, into a larger picture that her observers could never anticipate. Sometimes in a place where nobody's listening, silence becomes the sharpest weapon. Because only those with enough experience and strength know how to turn every wound into the spark for the ultimate response. Megan and Chuck's mocking laughter hadn't even died down before Marjorie quietly slipped from their view, her shoulders slightly hunched, not from surrender, but under the invisible weight of 100 cold stares in the waiting area. She paused at the section reserved for passenger complaints, clutching her phone and her first-class ticket as if they were her last shreds of dignity. Yet, every time she lifted her eyes, seeking a sympathetic glance, the staff averted their gaze, feigned busyness, or turned away as though her presence were a nuisance to be swept aside. One by one, Marjorie approached each person, from the information desk agent to the boarding area security guard, only to hear the same rehearsed responses. "We don't have the authority to handle this. Please wait." "Please move to the other line to avoid blocking the process. Your issue has been noted. Please wait for an update." Each reply was polite, precise, and utterly devoid of empathy, as if the entire system were programmed to repackage every injustice as a routine, technical glitch. That collective coldness wasn't the result of any single individual. It was the clearest sign of an invisible machine, where every link in the chain knows to stay silent and look the other way whenever injustice doesn't directly affect them. Around her, the crowd kept flowing. Everyone seemed too busy, too important to stop. A few travelers cast furtive glances at Marjorie before quickly looking away, afraid to get tangled in a problem that wasn't theirs. No one, young or old, any skin color, dared to ask, "Is something wrong?" That silence choked the air, turning injustice into the expected, the victim into a burden no one wanted to carry. Marjorie realized this clearly. She was being pushed out of first class not only because of her skin color but also because of her age. Here, an older black woman, no matter how poised, polite, or accomplished, was instantly suspected, labeled a slow old lady or troublesome passenger, to be phased out as quietly as possible. Every privilege and right that should have been hers was twisted into a system error, and then stripped away without remorse. Meanwhile, behind the counter, Megan idly scrolled on her phone, found a hidden angle, and snapped a photo of Marjorie. In seconds, she'd posted it to the Elite Crew Lounge group chat, where airport staff swap funny stories about categorized passengers, adding the caption, "Old lady about to flip out over her first-class ticket. Bet she'll be suing next. Who's calling security?" Laughing emojis and mocking comments piled up instantly. Chuck even sent a drama queen sticker with the note, "Just another day at the airport. Let's see how long she lasts." What they didn't know was that every message, every sneer, was being recorded. not just by the woman they mocked, but by the very system they believed they controlled. Through all this silent refusal, Marjorie showed no outward negativity. She quietly collected every piece of evidence: photos, confirmation emails, notes on her phone detailing each staff interaction and every tiny element of their exclusion process. To her, this was no longer about reclaiming a seat. It was about exposing a truth. This system didn't just eject customers. It crushed human dignity with its chilling silence and collective nod of consent. In a place where every voice is drowned out and only the steady boarding announcements echo alongside vacant stares, patience and the sharp memory of experience can be the spark for an underground storm no one ever sees coming. Amid the siege of indifference and the stifled laughter from the staff counters, Mrs. Reed remained composed as she once again demanded to speak with someone higher up. Her gaze was steely, yet her tone stayed polite, as if reminding everyone of the bare minimum standard of fairness. But that very composure only served to fluster the airport's twisted system, and it soon shifted into full defensive mode. A few minutes later, in the chill of the boarding area, Ron Wallace appeared. He was the quintessential mid-level manager. Perfectly pressed navy suit, sharp, metal-rimmed glasses, a touch of silver at his temples, and an impeccably restrained demeanor. But behind that courteous exterior lay a hardened resolve, forged by years of enforcing internal power structures. Ron paused beside two security officers, Paul and Jimmy, stern-faced and deliberate in their movements, their broad shoulders barring her path. He skimmed his clipboard, confirmed the details, and then strolled over to where Mrs. Reed stood, maintaining a textbook professional smile. "Mrs. Reed," he began, "I'm Ron Wallace, the duty manager. We've reviewed the system thoroughly, and I'm sorry, but there are currently no first-class seats available for you. I must ask you to leave the boarding area to avoid disrupting the process, and so that we can serve other passengers." His voice was calm, not hostile, but every word carried weight. There was no pretense of genuine discussion. She had become a problem to be removed quickly and quietly. Paul and Jimmy stepped forward, their presence alone forming an invisible barrier between her and the counters. A single cold glance, squared shoulders, measured steps. It was a choreography honed by countless rehearsals, designed to escort anyone deemed too demanding out of sight. None of the nearby passengers spoke up. Some buried their eyes in their phones. Others looked away, reluctant to witness the ordeal. That collective silence wasn't just apathy. It was complicity, where everyone understood what was happening but chose safety over intervention. Meanwhile, Megan at the adjacent counter stifled a grin as she texted the group chat. They're about to have her escorted out of the boarding area, just as predicted. Ron leaned in slightly, preserving his professional tone. "Mrs. Reed, I suggest you use the lounge area to address your complaint. This will prevent further inconvenience to other passengers. We will contact you once we have additional information from the system." Surrounded by a cold bureaucracy and a complicit crowd, Mrs. Reed lifted her chin. Her eyes were no longer sad, but quietly observant, as if mentally etching every face and every sidelong glance. Her patience and dignity, honed by years of experience, spoke volumes. She gathered her documents without a word, nodded once, and turned toward the lounge. As she walked away, she felt the chill seep through her layers, not from the airport's air conditioning, but from a system ready to push anyone different to the margins. Each deliberate, steady step was living proof that true power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, a system's cold, indifferent silence is its most ruthless weapon. Marjorie's footsteps echoed softly on the cold stone floor as she made her way toward the lounge. each step growing heavier, as if bearing the weight of all the sorrow and steadfast resolve she'd carried through a lifetime. No one followed or spoke, yet she knew nothing that had just happened would fade into oblivion, because inside her, the memory of those scornful glances and icy voices still rang loud. Settling into a tucked-away corner of the waiting area, Marjorie quietly observed the airport's frenetic pace. Blue and white uniformed staff hurrying by, passengers chatting excitedly about vacations and business deals, completely oblivious to the older black woman who'd been pushed out of the VIP zone. But something different had awakened within her. The survival instinct of a woman who'd lived long enough to know that justice doesn't simply fall into your lap. It has to be built, piece by piece, from the smallest fragments of evidence. She pulled out her phone, adjusted the camera angle, and captured a shot of the check-in desk and the faces of the staff who'd taken part in stripping her of her rightful privileges. Then she opened an email from her assistant in Los Angeles, where Reed Global Travel's legal and communications teams had already flagged the risk of discrimination at major airport hubs. The message read, "Multiple internal comments from JFK staff referencing Ms. Reed with mocking, discriminatory language have been detected. Screenshots attached." Marjorie read each note. That old lady's about to throw a fit over her first-class ticket. Bet she sues. We'll definitely call security any minute now. She's gonna go viral on social media like always. Her hand didn't shake, and she didn't burst into anger. Instead, she calmly took screenshots of every message, noting the timestamp and display name of each account. She filed every image and file into a folder labeled Incident at JFK, the personal cause file she'd maintained for decades, chronicling every act of injustice she'd encountered on international routes. Her perspective, seemingly delicate, was razor-sharp in its clarity. To Marjorie, nothing was trivial when honor, dignity, and her company's reputation were on the line. Her calm confidence and habit of meticulously gathering proof made her the most dangerous adversary to any callous system. Amid the cold atmosphere and the noisy crowd, she drafted a secure message to her LA assistant. Confirm freeze on all JFK vendors, halt July routings, activate legal protocols. Prioritize collecting all evidence related to Tanya Bennett, Grant Miller, Ron Wallace, Megan Hayes, and Chuck Evans. Extract camera footage from 5 to 9 a.m. this morning. She hit send. A dry ding signaled that the power shift had begun. Marjorie knew that real strength doesn't come from public outcry. Instead, it lies in quietly assembling every piece of evidence to restore justice at exactly the right moment. In that bustling airport, no one would suspect that the elderly woman seated in a lonely corner was silently rewriting the fate of a system worth hundreds of millions. But Marjorie knew, and she would never surrender. Amid the din and the steady tide of passengers drifting through the lounge, Marjorie Reed quietly continued refining her notes and gathering every scrap of evidence. She was used to the crowd's silence, yet she never lost faith that somewhere someone might speak up for justice, even if only for a fleeting moment. And in that very instant, the stillness cracked. Jason Patel, a well-groomed Asian-American businessman in his 40s with a composed bearing and eyes alight with unwavering resolve, rose from a seat near the boarding area. He had witnessed almost everything: Tanya's disdainful glare, Grant's icy detachment, Ron's soft escort by security. Without hesitation, he strode straight to the counter where Megan Hayes was furtively checking her phone, her forced smile vanishing the moment she saw him. "Excuse me," Jason said, his voice cutting through the hush. Why was that older woman, Ms. Reed, removed from first class like that? "I saw her boarding pass with my own eyes. This is outright discrimination." The lounge seemed to hold its breath. A few heads turned, others looked down even more pointedly. Megan faltered, shooting a quick look at Chuck before forcing on her practiced calm. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not authorized to discuss another passenger's booking. Our privacy policy prevents me from explaining seat changes or related matters." Jason wouldn't let her off the hook. "You loudly told her off in front of everyone, yet now you claim privacy? Do you think no one noticed how you treated her?" Megan feigned deafness and stepped back toward Chuck Evans, who leaned on the counter with a heavy but guarded expression. Tension crackled in the air as murmurs rippled through the lounge, proof that the circle of silence had finally been breached. Sensing the situation slipping from his control, Ron Wallace appeared, positioning himself between Jason and Megan. His silver-rimmed glasses framed a stern gaze as he spoke in calm, clipped tones. "Sir, this is an internal matter. If you're not directly involved, please leave this area and allow us to proceed. Should you continue to disrupt order, we will have to summon airport security." Jason tightened his grip on his briefcase but stood his ground. "I'll remember how you all acted today, and I'm not the only one who saw it." Ron said nothing further, merely signaling Paul and Jimmy to form a line between Jason and the counter. The atmosphere grew thick with the unspoken conflict between an invisible authority and the conscience of a lone bystander. Realizing he couldn't change the outcome right then, Jason quietly returned to his seat. But before he sat, he paused beside Marjorie and offered her a respectful nod, an unspoken reassurance that she was not truly alone in that crowd. Marjorie met his gaze with a quiet, grateful look, silently noting the face of the stranger who dared to speak when everyone else stayed silent. As Jason settled back down, the lounge's tension eased ever so slightly. Though his intervention wouldn't undo the injustice immediately, it was the first crack in a wall of silence, and Marjorie knew that sometimes one crack is all it takes for the light of justice to seep into even the darkest corners of a system. Amid the clamor of the lounge and the steady stream of indifferent passers-by, Marjorie Reed continued refining her notes and gathering evidence in silence. She was no stranger to a crowd's apathy, but she never lost faith that someone, anyone, might speak up for what's right, even if only for a fleeting moment. And then, as if on cue, the calm shifted. Jason Patel's nod lingered in her mind like a faint beacon through the haze of injustice, but she knew the system wouldn't let such a crack widen. It would tighten its grip, more discreetly, more ruthlessly. Like a cold variation in a symphony of power, a subtle retaliation began to unfold, all wrapped in the guise of procedure. Just minutes later, as Marjorie quietly reviewed her files in the lounge, a young security officer named Alex Carter approached. Though youthful in appearance, his eyes already bore the indifference he'd learned from his elders. Flashing his badge and radio, he greeted her with the most courteous tone he could muster, without a trace of genuine goodwill. "Good afternoon, Ms. Reed. We need you to undergo an additional security screening before your flight. Please come with me." Marjorie registered no surprise. At her age, after decades in the industry, she knew that additional screening was often just a pretext. Rather than protest or show outrage, she nodded, gathering her papers and standing, her eyes sweeping the lounge to commit to memory every staff member's position and every averted glance. Alex led her down a long corridor of sealed glass and stark white walls to a small, isolated screening room. Inside were only 2 plastic chairs, a low table, and a single security camera tucked into a corner. With a soft click, he shut the door behind them and left. No further explanation, no questions asked. The chill in that room was not just from the air conditioning, but from calculated indifference. an unspoken, systemic assertion of control. No one inspected her bags. No one asked about her itinerary. No one even confirmed her identity. There was only an extended silence, removing her from the first-class environment and isolating her from the flow of travelers she had every right to join. Outside, staff like Tanya, Grant, Megan, and Ron all understood the playbook. There was no need to publicly humiliate Marjorie Reed. Simply escort her out of sight of the VIPs and let the lingering wait become a silent sentence, a psychological game of attrition. They believed that her frustration would cool in solitude, that the sense of smallness and isolation would break her spirit. Sitting up straight in that screening room, staring at the featureless white wall, Marjorie recognized the true nature of this tactic. Real power doesn't always bellow. It sometimes whispers in endless silence until the victim questions her own worth. Yet she also knew that for a woman her age, hardened by countless trials and soft abuses concealed as procedure, that same silence could become a source of strength. The strength of memory, of documentation, and of an unyielding resolve. Time flowed on outside, but inside that room, Marjorie's endurance was forging a new armor, painful and cold, yet silently resolute. She didn't know when the door would open again, nor how many more invisible tests lay ahead. But in her heart, a quiet rebellion had already taken root, waiting for the moment to surge forth and shatter all the polite pretense and poisonous smiles once and for all. Time in that isolated screening room seemed to stretch on forever. Every minute that passed, Marjorie Reed had to remind herself to stay calm and take deep breaths so she wouldn't break under the system's cunning psychological assault. When the door finally opened, it wasn't one of the veteran managers who appeared, but a young staff member who awkwardly announced, "The procedure is complete," and invited her to return to the main counter area. Marjorie left that chilly room with quiet but steady steps. She returned to the desk holding a bare thread of hope that it was all over, that she would finally be treated like any other customer. But in this system, her fate had been sealed from the start. Waiting behind the counter was Karen Smith, the shift supervisor, a white woman in her 40s with softly curled brown hair, sharp eyes, and a voice honed by thousands of shifts. Karen didn't bother to hide her irritation. In front of the line of waiting passengers, she grabbed Marjorie's first-class ticket and flung it back onto the counter with arrogant force, making it bounce before landing face up. "I don't care how much you paid, Miss Reed," Karen declared loudly, deliberately pacing her words so everyone behind could hear. "Your voice alone disqualifies you from first class." For a moment, the entire terminal froze. Some passengers stared in shock. Others exchanged uneasy glances. A young man whispered, "That's ridiculous. Who talks to a customer like that?" Yet most kept their heads down, pretending to be engrossed in their phones, afraid to get involved. Their silence became a cowardly shield for the crowd, but each muted response felt like a deeper cut to Marjorie's dignity. Karen pressed on in a mocking tone. "There are standards for first class, Miss Reed. Not everyone who pays gets in. You might want to double-check your booking before you file another complaint. We don't serve out-of-standard customers." She didn't stop at words. Karen tapped commands into the system to strip away every benefit Marjorie had purchased. Priority boarding, special meal service, VIP lounge access, all revoked. Even Marjorie's luggage was downgraded to the economy hold, despite her having paid in full for the upgrade and special handling. None of the other staff, Tanya, Megan, Chuck, or Grant, dared intervene. In their group chat, mocking messages flickered to life. Karen showed her how it's done. Hope she learned who's boss around here. Today's drama is off the charts. Marjorie revealed no tears and made no protest. She picked up her ticket, straightened her coat, and kept her shoulders from shaking, even as her heart weighed heavy. At her age, she knew all too well that public humiliation delivered by the mouthpiece of a system cuts deeper than any silent stare of contempt. She offered no excuses. She shed no tears or outbursts. Instead, she quietly documented every moment, storing it in her memory, on her phone, and in her case files. Every face, every glance, every word became evidence of a system that crushes human dignity through collective force, through the silent complicity of the indifferent and the self-appointed enforcers. And in the bitter cold of that humiliation, Marjorie Reed understood this. If today was the day she was stripped of her rights, tomorrow this very system would face the consequences of every word they had spoken so publicly. Amid the scrutinizing gazes and the cold words still echoing behind her, Marjorie Reed left the service counter with shoulders squared and steps deliberate. Though no trace of shame registered on her face, inside her a silent, icy undercurrent stirred, not of hurt, but of the cold resolve of a leader tempered over decades. Reaching the end of the hallway, where blue LED lights cast a pale glow on the white tile floor, she paused at the large glass window overlooking part of the runway and the flickering departures board. Slipping her hand into her coat's inner pocket, she retrieved a secure Reed Global travel device, reserved only for the highest level directives. Without hesitation, she entered the internal code, each keystroke confident and precise. Deploy Protocol D. Her voice was low but unwavering as it transmitted over the company's encrypted network. Halt all cooperation with JFK and ATL immediately. Freeze every vendor contract. Reroute all charter schedules, business class packages, and international partners to Denver and Miami. All public statements must be vetted by in-house counsel. No media engagement until I approve. Almost at once, her command rippled like a silent quake through JFK's operations and its entire partner network. In charter coordination centers, bright red error warnings began to flash. Authorization. For access to the VIP lounges failed, and Reed Global's elite client portals started refusing logins. Premium lounge staff blinked in confusion as priority cards ceased to work, while dozens of international business groups found their itineraries instantaneously rerouted to nearby airports. JFK's International Sales Office and ATL's Charter Partner Desk plunged into chaos. Automated emails from Reed Global halted cooperation, sending freeze notices to hundreds of vendors, agents, and partners, every contract suspended without exception. A slew of VIP bookings, all-inclusive resort packages, MICE events, and conferences in. New York and Atlanta came to an abrupt standstill. Special charter flights for top investors and executives from Europe and the Middle East were collectively diverted to Denver or Miami. Meanwhile, in the staff chat groups where Megan, Chuck, Tanya, and others had been trading jeers just hours before, all the taunting emojis vanished as systems flashed critical errors. On every operations dashboard, Reed Global, active, turned to suspended, under review. Senior IT personnel began fielding urgent calls, system locked, high-net-worth client data gone, priority bookings from Zurich, Dubai, and Singapore redirected without explanation. In the executive boardroom, department heads scrambled in utter disbelief. Anderson Bell, JFK's Director of International Sales, stared at his familiar metrics. Every VIP revenue line and charter routing entry wiped clean. It required no deep expertise to see the fallout. If Reed Global Travel fully enforces Protocol D, the airport stands to lose over 40% of its premium clientele and imperil decades of cultivated international partnerships. Back at the terminal's main hall, Marjorie Reed neither rushed nor flinched. Her calm eyes remained fixed on the runway as she awaited confirmation that each order had been carried out. No threats, no public statements needed. True power, she knew, could be as simple as a single, chilling click within the system. Behind the scenes, mid-level managers like Karen Smith, Ron Wallace, Tanya Bennett, and Megan Hayes began receiving those first terse emails from above. Urgent. All hands. Meeting to assess our partnership crisis with Reed Global. Prepare comprehensive incident reports. The smug triumph of earlier hours gave way to unease and impotence as they faced the real consequences of their small, prejudice-driven choices. This was no longer merely a customer pushback. It was a total game-changer, where an older woman, once silenced by 1,000 polite slights, used that very silence to bring an entire system to its knees. Marjorie Reed's decisive button press hit like a silent quake, rippling through every hidden corner of the aviation power structure without so much as a warning. As she quietly left the boarding area, the far ends of those power lines began to unravel so rapidly that no one could keep up appearances of professionalism. At the management offices of JFK and ATL, an onslaught of messages, emails, and calls flooded Reed Global Travel's legal department. Each one begged the same urgent requests. Please contact Ms. Marjorie Reed immediately. Reconfirm the executive-level contracts. Suspend Protocol D. Warning, priority customer routing at the risk of collapse. But every line was met with the same firm reply from Reed Global's legal team. Any direct contact with CEO Marjorie Reed will be recorded as a post-incident violation. Please submit all claims through legal channels. Further decisions depend on the internal audit process under Protocol D. Every word slammed the door on any attempt by partner systems to put out the fire. There were no more friendly phone calls, no flexible solutions, only rigid protocols, and an icy barrier between the injured party and the system that once viewed itself as the hub of all revenue streams. Within 24 hours, major partners in Europe and Asia issued their own official notices. Due to shareholder value concerns, we are withdrawing from all premium customer programs at JFK and ATL. We are suspending all charter agreements with any parties involved in the Reed Global incident. We request an immediate review of frontline staff recruitment, training, and quality control procedures. The domino effect exploded out of control. Luxury tour operators in Switzerland, Singapore, Dubai, London, and Frankfurt all paused bookings through JFK and ATL. Reed Global's elite clientele was suddenly rerouted to Denver, Miami, and Los Angeles, freezing the traditional international business hubs. Meanwhile, JFK and ATL leadership scrambled into emergency meetings. The boardroom was packed, the tension crackling like a live wire. On the big screens, contracts glowed red and flipped to frozen in real time, while revenue charts plummeted by the minute. Detailed loss reports showed tens of millions vanished within the first 48 hours. In desperation, executives combed through every internal process, pulling security camera footage, scouring emails and chat logs line by line. They uncovered the mocking remarks and private jabs of Megan, Tanya, and Chuck, Ron, Karen, and Grant's cold directives, and the blatant biases lodged in every interaction from the moment Marjorie arrived at the airport. Anderson Bell, JFK's director of international sales, looked shell-shocked as he reviewed frame after frame of Marjorie being ignored, downgraded from first class, and publicly humiliated by Karen Smith. In every internal briefing, the line, "We have shot ourselves in the foot," echoed with bitter panic. This crisis wasn't just about lost revenue. It threatened to collapse their brand and topple decades of international partnerships and vendor networks, all because of a few employees' unchecked prejudices and a culture of silent complicity that had never faced real consequences. As the fallout spread, each department trembled. Staff who once thought themselves invisible, safely shielded by the system, now panicked over every message, every payroll line, every canceled contract. The key players, Tanya, Megan, Karen, Ron, and Grant, realized they'd become the epicenter of an unprecedented crisis, and that no one could dodge personal accountability. In every report reaching the board, Marjorie Reed's name appeared again and again, as living proof that a systems reckoning doesn't start with a bang, but with the accumulation of small, biased acts, the cold words long forgotten, and the sneers of those who fancied themselves arbiters of proper protocol. And this time, the one who was cast aside chose to speak up, not with shouts but with authority, intelligence, and a silence powerful enough to bring the whole system to its knees. In the upheaval that rocked both JFK and ATL, personnel decisions were made at unprecedented speed. In the aftermath of reviewing every security camera frame and line of internal chat logs, an emergency disciplinary board was convened immediately. They understood that if they didn't act fast, not only their reputation but the very future of their airports would collapse. First up was Karen Smith. Just hours after the emergency meeting, she was summoned to Human Resources with an expression of utter disbelief. In front of legal counsel, security officers, and a few stunned colleagues, she was handed her termination papers on the spot for severe breaches of professional standards, public acts of discrimination, and serious harm to the company's reputation. Gone was her haughty composure. She packed her belongings into a clear plastic bag and was escorted out of the terminal under shocked, whispering gazes, an ending she'd never imagined. Next came Ron Wallace. His dismissal notice cited charges of complicity in discriminatory behavior, failure to protect customer interests, and allowing a large-scale crisis to occur. Ron was given no opportunity to speak. He was simply told that any future inquiries would need to go through the legal department. Grant Miller was not spared either. Once praised as a professional manager, he was branded a prime example of failures in frontline training and supervision, removed from his leadership role pending further investigation into his involvement with previous customer incidents. Megan Hayes, who'd once thought a few mocking memes and private jokes in a staff chat could remain behind closed doors, was hit next by a wave of media and public backlash. Her suspension took effect immediately. Her internal accounts were locked, her email forwarded to legal for handling. During the investigation, numerous customers she'd ridiculed came forward with formal complaints, building a hefty file of grievances against her. But Megan's most remarkable turning point came later, once the storm had calmed. Facing unemployment, widespread online outrage, and no prospects in the service industry, she began to reflect on the deeper consequences of her actions. One day, an application appeared in the inbox of Compass Forward, the nonprofit Marjorie Reed founded to promote justice, equality, and anti-discrimination training. Megan's note read simply, "I do not expect forgiveness, but I want to learn how to make amends. I want to understand what I never cared about before." Others, from mid-level managers like Grant and Ron to frontline staff like Tanya and Chuck, were reassigned or required to attend retraining programs on ethics, customer rights, and professional conduct. Some junior employees were moved to new roles and closely supervised, no longer able to hide in the invisible culture of complicity. News of the Reed Global incident and the sweeping dismissals and reassignments at America's two busiest airports quickly became international headlines. Outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNBC, and Reuters ran stories titled, "An elderly black woman makes JFK and ATL pay for a morning of prejudice, a costly lesson in complicit culture," when true power lies in knowing when to remain silent. Yet Reed Global Travel itself stayed completely silent. No press releases, no interviews. All developments were conveyed only through legal filings, partnership adjustments, and fundamental shifts in the global travel and transport ecosystem. In that silence, every wrongdoer, those who insulted her, those who looked away, those who covered up, and those who remained indifferent, was forced to confront the reality that the true cost wasn't just losing a job, but having helped build and sustain a system they once believed untouchable. The uproar at JFK eventually subsided in the media storm. Yet Marjorie Reed's name never once appeared in print or before a single news camera. Throughout that tumultuous period, she deliberately embraced silence, a quiet kind of power that needs no fanfare but resonates most profoundly where it matters. Back in the Reed Global Travel offices, she carried on with her daily duties, approving contract sheets, directing her legal team to safeguard every client's rights, forging new partnerships, and raising the bar for professional ethics. But her vision had grown far beyond any single deal. She used her experience, her standing, and even the wounds she'd endured to seed an entirely new ecosystem. One built on anti-discrimination, on educating communities about empathy and social responsibility. From Compass Forward, her Justice and Anti-Bias Training Foundation, to expanded scholarship programs, to real-time client feedback systems, and new investments in education, healthcare, and media, all bore her imprint. Reed Global's ecosystem became a model for other multinationals. Diversity wasn't just a slogan, it was a matter of survival. Months later, at a leadership and social justice forum in Geneva, when asked what had been the most powerful moment of her career, she simply smiled. A calm, knowing smile of someone who'd weathered storms without ever shouting, "It was the day I chose to be silent." Sometimes silence is the sharpest warning of all. The room fell silent, not from lack of understanding, but because, for the first time, they truly felt the terrifying power of a leader who masters her emotions, upholds her dignity, and wields silence as a force no system can ignore. Marjorie Reed's story has since become legendary, not only as a classic crisis management case, but as living inspiration for millions of older women, people of color, and anyone who's ever borne injustice in silence. In their stead, they've learned that calm resolve, paired with intellect and authority, is a weapon no one ever expects, and the one that can bring even the most entrenched system to its knees. In the private notes she passed on to Reed Global's next generation of leaders, she wrote just one line. "When a system tries to erase you with silence, let your silence boom like a wave that topples itself." With that legacy, Marjorie Reed didn't just transform airports, corporations, and supply chains. She lit an enduring fire under all those who've ever felt overlooked or dismissed as just another voice in the crowd. Through her example, they've come to understand. With enough courage, composure, and wisdom, silence itself can command the world's attention. If you found this story meaningful, please hit like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring content and real-world lessons in justice, humanity, and personal power. See you next time.